Okay. Greetings and welcome to Conversation with Tony Mobley. On Conversations with Tony Mobley today, I am talking with Mr. Robert Sababady. This is episode 110 of Conversation with Tony Mobley. Thanks to everyone for being a part of this new journey powered by Mimo Live. We also want to thank everyone for being a part of our old infrastructure. I want to thank the team behind Conversation with Tony Mobley and for all of your hard work. You can go to conversationwithtonymobley.com, register for our interactive chat, which is called Mokana, and it's courtesy of Alex Lindsay of 090. There you can put in your questions, and those questions can be voted up and down. And all you have to do is go to the website conversationwithtonymobley.com. And if you decide, you can also write those questions in the YouTube chat. All right, we're going to get right to it. So, the very first question, and we first say, welcome, Mr. Robert Sababady. Welcome to Conversation with Tony Mobley. Thank you so much for staying up so late to be here with me today. And the very first question is, who is Robert Sababady?
Thank you, Tony. It's a real pleasure to be here with you. And yes, it is late. It's 2 o'clock in the morning for me here in Europe. And that's part of who is Robert Sababdy, because this is where I live. Um, I My parents are from the Seychelles, and I spent a lot of time working in British companies, went to an English school, and then ended up in Poland on a contract for an American company. And this is where I stayed. And I have my family. My wife is Polish, and I have two lovely young daughters. And now I am running a business that started off as a COVID business due to the lockdown, and now my wife and I have evolved this business into something that has become our bread and butter. It feeds us, and it is what we are preoccupied in during the day, during the business day.
Fantastic. Can you talk a little bit more about how you got started in this business? And please share your company website.
Yeah. Uh, the company is called Online Interpreters Worldwide, and we started off on the day the lockdown was announced, mainly because my wife, who is a conference interpreter, had a fully booked schedule for the whole year, and suddenly with the lockdown, everyone cancelled on-site meetings and conferences, and she suddenly lost all of her potential business for the year. And I had been working on a new startup project for small and medium-sized businesses. And when the lockdown was announced, small and medium-sized businesses were the most hit by that decision. And so we decided not to launch the business because it was just the risk was too high. So my wife turned to me and said, "What can we do?" And I said, "How would you like to do interpreting online?" And because I knew a lot of the video conferencing systems, I turned to WebEx, to Zoom, to Microsoft Teams, uh, and we got in touch with the main players on the market that specialize just in online interpreting platforms. Looked at them all and decided that at the time that Zoom was the easiest way to start off. And we got a whole group of interpreters online on board all around Europe to learn how to use the interpretation on Zoom and to provide the service online. And so we effectively trained over 450 interpreters in Europe to use Zoom
Wow.
and to use the interpretation modules of Zoom because they were just unknown to the majority of people at the time.
Did
And
you just said 450
that is correct. That is correct.
throughout Europe?
Throughout Europe itself, we now have 650 all over the world that have been trained and to use Zoom with us for interpretation. And
That's
the
absolutely amazing.
and the way we and the reason we did it, I'll be very honest with you, Tony, is because I figured out that one, we wanted to help people in the community of interpreters because I saw the tragedy on my wife's face when she suddenly lost all of her business, potential business for the year, uh, when the lockdown was announced. And it was just the same case for most interpreters who are all around the world who do conference interpretation. But the training itself was quite easy because it's the functionality is basic. It was very basic at the time, and I managed to get some very good contacts with Zoom to give them feedback on what we need, how we need to change things, and and so that moved forward very quickly. And so that was the very beginning of what we did. But the reason, like I said, we trained all these interpreters was not only to assist, well, it was to assist the interpreters, but the outcome was that the interpreters had their own clients and they went to their clients and said, listen, we can still hold this meeting, this conference, we'll just have to do it online. And they brought us the customers, all the
Oh
interpreters
wow.
that we
Okay.
had trained. So it worked good for them, it worked good for us, and that's how the business started. It was a business that had no capex involved initially, no overheads, and we started investing all of the money that we earned, apart from money that we needed to provide food and pay our bills, and eventually got to the size that we are now, which is pretty impressive. In this, what I call the studio, which is built in our home, we have two soundproof interpretation booths that are fully prepared for all sorts of events. Um, each one can take two interpreters. They're fully mic'd and with screens, laptops, and of course all of the infrastructure that the interpreters require. In other words, they have ventilation systems to keep the air. I'm just looking up at the ventilation system so that they have fresh air all the time. They have heating systems to keep them warm during winter. And they have UPS backup power supply, which is also supported by a big generator outside so that even in the event of a power failure, we can continue our work. And to ensure that we have access to internet, we have two absolutely redundant internet access points that go through two different ISPs, two different operators, and have two different infrastructure platforms that they use. So we're pretty safe with that. And that was the very beginning, Tony. So we evolved from that, and
Wow.
I got involved not only with Zoom but also with WebEx because our customer base was mainly the corporate type clients, and then moved on to Microsoft Teams, where the majority of the corporate clients were, and that was the most difficult because the Microsoft Teams did not have an interpretation module built into their platform the time we started. And at the same time, there was a lot going around all over the world that Zoom is not safe. Zoom has problems for security reasons. The corporations wouldn't use Zoom at all. And so we moved mainly onto WebEx, provided by Cisco, which is a big name in the IT industry. And so the IT departments of big corporate organizations allowed us to come in that way because of WebEx.
Okay. Have you converted some of your business partners from WebEx to Zoom? I'm just curious.
Um, no, I'd have to be very honest and say no. However, we do use Zoom during hybrid events where we use Zoom as the main platform, as the studio type platform and the distribution platform to get into the organization's business platforms. So we would do all of the production work, for example, in Zoom, and then feed it into a WebEx meeting or a Microsoft Teams live event, so that the staff could just log in and be invited over their standard procedures and security in a safe manner.
Okay.
So,
Okay. I want to take this time to invite those who might be watching to please ask your questions in the chat on YouTube, or go to Conversation with Tony Mobley, register and participate in Mukana, where those questions can be, again, voted up or down. So, um, how many languages are you interpreting for?
well, like I said, we have about 650 interpreters that we work with all over the world. So our idea was our priorities were to get into 3 different time zones so that we can provide the services for our clients day and night, wherever they are located in the world. The second one was languages, and we went from the right down. So we started off, of course, with the main languages that most people request for, depending on their geographical location. And then we went lower into the more or the less popular, if I can say, by number languages. So at the moment, I can't tell you off the top of my head, but when we last counted, it was in the region of 55 or 56.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
But you need to
Wow.
keep in mind that Tony, that in Europe, in Europe itself, each country practically has its own language. So you cover 25 languages just within Europe itself. So and the rest come from other countries outside of Europe itself.
That's amazing. We have a question from Clark Lopez Waterman in Frankfurt, Germany. And his question is, well, I think he has 2 questions. I'm seeing 2 questions, looks like. Let's see. I'm going to go with the one that I can see. It says, in the old days, they used to have low-powered radio broadcasts of the many channels of, can't see the rest of that. Can you see it, Robert?
No, I can't see the question.
Okay. So, in the old days, they used to have low powered radio broadcasts of the many channels, and we're just going to go with, let's see. All right. Okay. My mom volunteered. This is also from Claudia Lopez Waterman. My mom volunteered doing some simultaneous translation many years ago. I remember her saying it was difficult. What is the most important thing to do well?
Um, with simultaneous interpretation, there are 2 things. Well, there are 3 types of interpretation that can take place. One is online, which we have all got to know over the last 3 years. Second one is on site, where you're in a booth at a conference. And the third is when you're doing it one-to-one for one specific person. You'll notice that a lot of presidents travel around the world, very high-profile people with their own personal interpreter that just whispers into their ear. So if we're looking at the conference interpretation, interpreters usually work in pairs because the cognitive load of doing several things at the same time is very, very heavy on brain power and energy. So they swap. So the two things that they really need to be able to do well is, and just think about this for a second because it's very difficult, is to be able to listen and speak at the same time, because you're listening to what the speaker's saying and you're speaking out in a different language what he just said. Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
And the second thing, of course, is to be able to translate what was said into the second language. So literally the process, the workflow would be, I listen to the person speaking, I translate it, move it across to my mouth, start sending it out, and listen to what the stuff is coming in. Now, very few people in the world can actually do that because it requires a certain connections in your brain to be working in a specific way for that to happen. I can't do it. I'm not an interpreter. I cannot do that. I'm a typical man. I can do one thing at a time. I can either listen or I can talk, and that's about it. But just to show you, just to understand how difficult this is, if you just sit in front of the TV or listen to someone speaking on YouTube and just repeat what he's saying, within a matter of 10 minutes, you'll be exhausted by just listening and repeating what he's saying, because it's a very unnatural form of working as a human, because you either usually speak or you listen. You don't do both at the same time.
Right.
So it's very tasking. So answering the question directly, yes. One is to be able to have that talent of being able to translate, and the other one is, of course, to listen and to speak at the same time. There are a lot of skills that interpreters need to learn, and they practice a lot. The amount of practicing they do is quite unbelievable. When I see my wife preparing for an assignment and the way she practices before the assignment, I'm really impressed. I don't have the patience or the discipline to be able to do what she does.
Is there a way to prepare to study to do that, or is that just you just have to have the talent?
Well, there are schools for interpreters. So if you want to become an interpreter, you need to go to a school, and there's certain skills that you learn. And at that point, after the first year, you will know whether you have that talent or not. Yeah. And if you don't have the talent, then you can opt out. If the area still is of interest to you, you can do a couple of things. You can do what's called consecutive translation, or interpretation. In other words, you say something to me, I listen to you, then you stop speaking, and then I translate and speak it out. And that's consecutive. It requires a different skill set. And it also requires that people usually have to be public figures, because they go out and they're seen, because they're standing next to the person that they're interpreting. So that also is it causes a lot of anxiety or stress amongst certain people. So they need to learn how to deal with that. And of course, making notes. I'm sure you can remember, my children don't even know what this is, but when I was at university, they taught us how to write in shorthand. In other words, there's a very quick form of writing that didn't use the standard alphabet that we use, and you could read it back phonetically and then or type it in somewhere. So interpreters also need to be able to write down and jot down things quickly and read them back to themselves, because one of the most difficult things for them is to remember numbers and dates. So as soon as a number or a date comes in, they need to not only listen, translate, and speak, but they also need to write down the number and then look down at it and read it back when they get to the point where they require to read it back. So yes, my wife does prepare for every event, and she prepares a glossary of words. So she needs to understand who is speaking, what the subject matter will be, and then if he has speaker notes for a presentation, she'll ask for the speaker notes, look at them, understand what the messaging is going to be, and then sit down with the presenter before the event and ask a couple of questions and things that she didn't understand or she doesn't quite get the context for.
Wow. Okay. That's amazing. We have another question from Clark Lopez Waterman from Frankfurt, Germany. In the old days, they used to have low-powered radio broadcasts of many channels of simultaneous language broadcasts. Is that still done?
Um, in a live conference environment, we use booths and an interpretation system, and attendees get, I don't have one right next to me at the moment, but these little receivers with channels on them, and they put headsets on, and they can select the channel or the language they want to listen to. Now, the two forms, from a technical point of view, there are two ways that is done. One is on a radio bandwidth, and that is today it's digital and it's fairly safe. But for very, very high important and high security meetings, the system used is at an infrared level. And they use infrared transmitters and receivers because those waves will not go outside of the room. So if there's a big conference room, even if you're standing outside next to the wall, you won't be able to receive on your receiver what's going on, being said in the inside. So it's just for security purposes.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. The next question is from Andre Dulay in Berlin. How did COVID change your workflow? Did you do remote interpretation before as well? You kind of answered that already, but just give us a recap for Andre's sake.
Mm. I wasn't even involved in this business before the COVID lockdown. My wife was the interpreter, and she was doing all of her work either on site, in a conference room, in a booth, or personally with speaking to one person or two people, what's called whispering. In other words, just for those two people she'd be interpreting. We didn't have any online work until COVID set in, and then we started looking and getting interested in that sort of interpretation business.
Thank you, Andre, for asking the question again. For those who may have come in late and didn't get Robert's first time sharing that, so thank you. The next question again is from Clark Lopez Waterman. What's the largest number of languages your business has provided translation for?
Well, that's a tricky question because if we're referring to online, we've done 12 languages. We've actually done 6 for Zoom itself. We did work for Zoom at one point, and we did the Zoom test kitchen with 6 languages uh, to show and showcase how we use Zoom for interpretation. For corporate type events, the maximum has been 12, and the 12 number comes from um, a limitation in the amount of infrastructure and costs that are required. And that cost goes up is a non-linear function. But we have been, when we get to larger numbers than that, we don't do it by ourselves. We have a group of companies that we work with all around the world, and we cooperate with them. The biggest event that we've participated in was for 8 languages, but we had 30 channels of the 8 languages going through because there were 30 different sessions in a big conference center that were happening parallel to each other, and each one required one of those 8 languages, at least one of those 8 languages. So that was a very, very tricky and difficult um, planning and project management role to make it work properly.
And again, I want to share Robert's business website name again. It's Online Interpreters Worldwide. Again, Online Interpreters Worldwide. Our next question is from Claude Lopez Waterman, Frankfurt, Germany. And this question is, how has video conferencing affected simultaneous translation?
That is a really good question. And what has happened amongst interpreters is that interpreters have formed groups of people that they feel comfortable working with. Because when you think about it, what is interpretation really? What is the core of interpretation? It's trust. Because the person listening to the interpretation has to trust that the interpreter is providing the right message. And the person giving the message has to trust the interpreter that the interpreter is passing the messaging across in the correct way, in the correct manner, and getting it across properly, independent, irrespective of culture, context, that there's a lot that goes with there. And so that's one of the aspects. The interpreters I've seen have grouped together, and they've formed smaller groups that work together, and they know how to work it together. The second thing is the structure of interpreters has changed, because when the lockdown was evoked, there are a lot of interpreters that couldn't move online. The cognitive load to an interpreter when he's interpreting online is far greater than when interpreting on site, because when you're on site, you have a tech person there who's set up the booth, who's set up the microphone, who's set up everything. If something doesn't work, you just turn around and say, I need some help, and that person helps you out. When you're online working from home, you don't have that tech support. You've got a laptop in front of you where you're working. You've got a second laptop where you're doing some research of words or glossary, or you've got some presentation that you're looking at. And you usually have a third appliance that you're using to communicate with your booth partner. Because professional interpretation platforms, and I don't want to use their names here, have an interface that allows the interpreters to see each other, communicate with each other, listen to each other, and the interpretation is going out to the meeting and the attendees. When interpreting on Zoom, WebEx, or Teams, you don't have that luxury. These platforms primarily assume that their system is going to be used connected to a professional interpretation system. So a lot of interpreters who are used to that comfort could not take the cognitive load. Either they were not computer literate enough, or they just could not cope with several pieces of equipment running at the same time and having to manage, look, observe, and know where to react to certain things. The other thing that has changed And that's a really good question, actually. The other thing that has changed is that um, interpreters, I find, are very social people. And with the lockdown and with interpreting online, there've been that contact with other people has been severed. They don't have that contact. And even my wife, when she comes back from an on-site job, is sits and tells me all about who she met and what they did and what they talked about. It's one of the aspects that she doesn't get when you're doing an online job.
I'm curious. Um, is is it possible that, and I guess I'm about to reference Alex Lindsay from the standpoint of, is it that the experience on Zoom or Teams or WebEx doesn't have the capacity for, and maybe a machine issue, or what I'm trying to get at is you were saying how excited your wife was about the fact that she gone to this in-person interpretation session, and how they are social people typically. But if the Zoom meeting or the Teams meeting or the WebEx is with the right machines, technology, microphones, cameras, if it is quality that is approximation of being in person, would that make a difference for some of the interpreters? And the reason why I asked the question is because I don't, and I'm not going to say that it's not politically correct, but who's to say that we don't have another pandemic or another type of something that doesn't allow us to interact with one another like we would like to? I think that one of the things that we have learned from the past COVID experience is that there are ways to do things online that can be done well enough that you get an approximation of being and engaging in a interpersonal relationship with people as if you're in the same room with them. And the reason why I say that is because I think, and you know, the interactions that we have sometimes in office hours or in Zoom Test Kitchen, those interactions are just as real and as authentic as interactions can be with people that are in person. So I was just curious to, if the level of technology is improved a bit more, do you think that people like your wife might be able to feel more comfortable in a online setting?
That's a good question. And I think the challenge here is to change or to enhance the functionality available for the interpreters. Because what you need to keep in mind is that if we take Zoom, WebEx, or Teams, the interpreters, once they get into their virtual booths, if you can call it that, are isolated from each other. They can see the speaker, but the speaker can't see them. The cameras are usually off, except, of course, for sign language interpretation. But the simultaneous interpreters usually have their cameras off. So they don't see each other through the meeting because this isn't something that people talk about, but the stress levels and the anxiety that the interpreters exhibit during their work usually makes them produce behavioral patterns that are sort of awkward. There'll be facial expressions, movements of the body, arms, and they're going through a lot of stress at the time. And so that's something they don't really want to share with a public audience. When they're in a booth, they're sort of closed off and everyone's looking towards the speaker and not towards the interpreters. So that effect isn't managed or controlled by anyone. But online, the interpreters switch off their cameras. They only use their microphones and their headsets. They don't see each other. They can't communicate with each other. So they have to have a separate piece of equipment. And we have talked, I have personally spent a lot of time talking to especially my people in the development teams of product management teams of Microsoft Teams and Zoom about building a proper interface for the interpreters, where they would be in like a breakout room, see the main feed, listen, interpret, see each other, ask each other for help, etc. However, because interpretation in terms of minutes and all of these big organizations turn to me in the and say the following thing: the percentage of minutes of meetings that include interpretation is a fraction of our whole business. It's not a priority.
Okay.
And so that that is not going to happen. What we do for big and important events, when we have interpreters that we work with, is we set up a meeting where we just have the interpreters. We bring the video and the audio from the main meeting into that Zoom meeting so the interpreters feel more accessible to each other. And then we take the feeds of the interpretation out and we push it back into the main event. And so we all can also do remote hybrid type interpretation, event interpretation in that way. And the interpreters feel better because they see each other, they can communicate with each other, they can use the chat in a very casual manner. And they help each other when one gets stuck. You can see visually, they recognize there's an issue and they'll just take over.
How many make up a team typically for a session of interpretation?
If
Is it
if yeah, if you're going on for up to 8 hours, you'd probably have two interpreters per channel, per language channel. Um, but and but if you're going on for several days, then you'd probably be swapping in and out and have three, and they'll be alternating between themselves because they get so tired and they need the break between the work that they do.
when you talked about hand gestures and facial expressions, is it kind of a performance that they're doing actually when they're interpreting?
Not so much of a performance. It's just a stress issue. Like there'd be hand movements, anything, the usual type of thing. Anxiety goes up, builds up, and it needs to be released. So it's released in an expression of facial or hand movement or stomping of the feet or whatever. Yeah. So those are the sort of, and it's not usually a behavior that the interpreters want other people to see.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. Laura Thompson, Beaumont, Texas, has a question. She says, can you talk about your technical setup in your studio?
Yes, I can, Laura. Thank you very much for that question. Well, I talked about the booths. We have two booths that we have for interpreters, so we can do two language channels. And by language channels, I'd say English French, French English would be one pair, English German, German English would be a second one, for example. And we have them here in the studio itself. Uh, and why do we only have two? Because they take up a lot of space, and if we need more, then we take them from one of our business partners. The majority of the events that we do are either one or two language channels. So this fulfills about 90% of the work we do in terms of man hours. Of course, the bigger events bring in more money, but in terms of man hours, this is enough for us. And I also use these booths when we're not interpreting. When I have a big event, I can put a producer in one of them. I can put someone has another function in the other, and we're all effectively in the same environment. So that's one part of the studio. The second part is where I'm sitting at the moment, is the production side. There's a big white screen behind me. We have um, a projector that is connected to one of the PCs. So whenever we're doing a live event, we always push the images from the different locations where we're streaming to, or from within the app, the platform that we're using, onto that big screen. So everyone around can just look up and see what's going on. Usually when we have a big event, there'll be up to 5 people in the studio itself, managing that event just here. In terms of infrastructure, um, we have redundant power. In other words, all of the main equipment is on a big UPS, which is also connected to a generator outside. So if the power drop is longer than half an hour, we will switch to generator power, and we can go on with generator power for day and night because it also is fueled by gas and by liquid gas. So we have two sources of fuel that we can run non-stop. And for internet, we are totally redundant. We in fact have 3 internet access points in this building here. One is for just the home use, so we keep that completely separate. And then we have a radio link that is dedicated just for us, and this goes through literally 2 data centers in order to get to the Zoom servers in Frankfurt. So the number of hops that it does from a technical point of view is minimum, so the delay is minimal, and we have least risk of something going wrong there. The other one is a fiber network that goes through one of the larger operators, and it goes all the way down to France because it goes via Orange. So they have their main IP exchanges in France, and that they both go into a TP switch that selects it has the main internet access, and then it switches to the second one if the main one goes down. And that switch is connected to 2 networks in our studio. We have a 10 gigabit network, which we use for all of our production work. So Zoom ISO will be on that. The big production machine I have in the background will be on that. All of our streaming will go out through that. And then we have a second network, which is a 1 gigabit network, where we connect the interpreters and the other people who are just managing the event. Apart from all of that, we have a big network storage system because using Zoom ISO, we record up to usually between 9 and 10 channels. And so the 10 gigabit network allows us to store that directly onto the NAS in real time, which works out really, really well. And it also allows us to do any NDI work that we require to do, and we feed the NDI usually into vMix to go out of the studio for streaming on YouTube and other platforms. And we use Vimeo a lot because Vimeo has an embedded player that you can clean out. It looks completely clean. It doesn't have any YouTube logos or anything like that on it.
Okay.
So that's the main thing. We've just looking around, you haven't missed anything out. And then, of course, all of the ventilation, emergency lights, if there's no power, it took us a while. I remember the first time the power went out and the generator came on and the UPS was running. We were sitting here in the dark because we hadn't thought about emergency lighting if there's no electricity, and it was the middle of the night. So the very next day we had that installed. And we
Wow.
we you learn by through mistakes, that's for sure.
Yeah. Can you talk about some of the equipment that you have in front of you?
What do we use? Yeah,
I heard you say vMix,
yeah,
and
we
I
have
know that you have an interest in Mimo Live, so that means at least one Windows machine and one Mac machine, at least one.
yeah. In the studio itself, we have 23 computers, if I can call it that. Um, there are a lot of Windows machines, but we have the Macs for production work. I am on a Mac Mini at the moment. We also have a lot of laptops that we use when we do hybrid meetings because another part of our job, of our business, is production work on site, where we have a group of camera operators and audio people that go out on site, connect up, and feed everything into one of our Zoom meetings or some other meeting for us to do the production. But we always bring things back into this studio and then stream it out from here. So we use a lot of Panasonic cameras, which allow us to record in 4K on the camera itself and have a feed into, for example, an ATM Mini at 1080p and give the right quality that we require. And of course, with that goes the requirement of audio, having good audio. So we have standardized on AKG microphones. However, with the mixers, we use Shure automatic mixers for conferences where we can select how many microphones are active at any one time. And that gives us clean sources of audio for the interpreters because we're very focused on getting clean audio so that the interpreters can hear exactly what is being said, the way it's being said, and being able to provide their messaging back. Apart from what other equipment do we have in here in terms of computers? Zoom ISO, that's a Mac Mini M2 Pro with a 10 gigabit port, which we spec'd out to get those 9 to 10 channels, ISO channels in full HD. And the Mac Mini M2 Pro works well. It really does a good job on that. And the other machine that we run vMix on is a i9. It was the last generation, second last generation of Intel microprocessors with two NVIDIA um, graphics cards in there, which we use for all of our production work on vMix. But we also use it because it's got two 4K screens on it. We use it for all of our DaVinci Resolve editing. We do a lot of editing, post-editing work. That's why we record all of those ISO feeds um, to make summaries of meetings, summaries of events, speaker summaries, and also to do work that um, involves putting in captions, translated captions, embedded captions onto films.
Wow, that's amazing. Wow. How are you sharing your video production component of your business? I was looking at the website today, and I didn't see any of that. Um, is there a way in which you're sharing that?
Well, we have positioned ourselves as an interpretation online business, and the all of the other services that we provide are auxiliary. What we have done from a business point of view is um, we know that there are a lot of production people that can do the job far better than we can. And so going into that market as a production company with no experience before COVID is a hard sell. But going in as a company that deals with interpretation and then saying, yes, we will handle this, yes, we will handle that, has worked for us really well. And the other thing about it is that because we've gone in with the interpretation, the the average revenue per event per customer is far higher than if you just go in as a production company. which has also
Gotcha.
helped us build this business quickly and on a cash basis. In other words, we are not a company that is in debt. We have used cash flow to generate, to build and invest in all of the equipment that we require.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. Andre is back, and his question is: did the workload for the interpreters change from on site to online, other than no traveling anymore?
Yes, it did, Andre. The the um the two aspects of that. One is a lot of businesses now ask for interpretation for very short meetings. In other words, you have a 1.5, 2 hour meeting. So the way we cost that has changed. The amount of work the interpreter needs to do is just as much, but he just doesn't have that travel time to get to the venue. So the interpreters themselves can do more than one job a day, and that's how they usually book their time. Mm, so that has increased in terms of the number of jobs, but the time, the length of jobs has is shorter.
Thank you. Thank you, Andre, for that question. Cloud Lopez Waterman is back again, and his question is, how does time come into play? Is the latency an important factor to consider for translation? If someone knows a little bit of the language, can it be off-putting to them to be out of sync?
Yeah, it'll always be out of sync because simultaneous interpretation usually takes place. It starts about 2 to 3 seconds after the speaker starts speaking, so it also ends 2 to 3 seconds after that. So you've also always got that difference of 2 to 3 seconds in what is the speaker speaking and what the interpreter is speaking. And this isn't to do with technology. It's just the way the interpreters work. They need that time to be able to listen, understand, translate, speak it out, and listen to the next one. And that flow is requires that time delay. But to answer your question, is it confusing for people to hear the translation if they understand the original language? Well, people, I know this may sound strange. People who understand the original language well enough won't take the translation services because they want to hear it in the original language. Because one thing about listening to a person in the original language is that not only do you get the message, but you also get the emotions, the visuals, the change in voice
Right.
tone, everything that comes through. Really good interpreters are able to give some of that, but they will never give as much as the original speaker gives.
Right. Okay. The next question is, what is next for Robert Sababady?
Next, well, that's a good question. In terms of business, we are now moving onto Zoom sessions, and we want to do a lot of production work with a lot of live streaming because that's where our clients are asking us to provide the business. It seems as if the need for reach is growing, and the need for reach is growing in the area of multi streaming, in other words, simultaneously streaming to several locations at the same time, as opposed to just streaming to one. And so that's our biggest challenge at the moment to work on that and figure out how to do that properly. We've learned how to do it because when we have a job with interpretation, we usually stream in the languages that we're interpreting in. So if we have a very simple job, it'll be streaming in the original language, streaming with the first language, streaming with the second language. So we always have three streams going out at a minimum, and very often to the same location. So if it's on YouTube, you can get it. Some people have different channels and different languages. If it's on Facebook, it'll usually be separate fan pages that we're streaming into in different languages. And that's in the business area. In the personal area, um, we homeschool our children. So our children are coming up to exams now. So we're working very hard with them to get them ready for the exams. And then after the new year, we're off on a 2-week holiday. I snowboard, and so does my wife, and my kids snowboard and ski. So we're going off. There's a big group of us, about 80 of us, just families with children, and we hire a whole building up in the mountains in the south of Poland, and we spend 2 weeks there
Wow.
together, just sharing. And our kids are literally counting down to the day they go there. They're looking forward to it.
This sounds fantastic. Final question for tonight. You are speaking to the world. What do you want the world to know?
Tony, I don't know how to answer that question, but definitely I'd like to the world to know that there 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 are some great people in this world, very positive people, and people like Tony who have invited me to be able to speak here. I'm very grateful for that. And other people all the people who've asked the questions, this just shows that when you have a community of people, uh, they will cover your back, they will stand up for you, they will help you when you fall, and they'll be there to share your happiness when you achieve something good. So yeah, it's
And we did not get a chance to talk about your faith, but I know we only have a few minutes left. If you want to just give us just a few words about that, I'd appreciate it.
okay. Well, I was born in a Christian family and went to a Catholic school, and so faith has always been religion has always been part of my life, and it has defined the values that I have in my life today. And we are, as a family, um, pay a lot of attention to what goes on in that area of our lives. And we also build our communities within those communities of different religions. Have we are involved in communities of religions from all over the world, really, and we try and keep that link of community religion as opposed to religion that brings a community with it. And so we enter different communities and have different backgrounds of different from different countries, different uh, ethnic groups, and we learn and open ourselves up to what they have to say and what they have to bring to the table. And hopefully we are capable of bringing something interesting to the table for them as well, Tony.
Can you talk a little bit about what you do on Sundays?
Yes, I am, apart from going to mass in our local parish and going with our children who sing in the choirs, and we spend time preparing them and helping them rehearse before they go there. I am also a steward of the Holy Communion, so I will help during the service if help is needed. And then after that, I take the Holy Communion to the sick. We the sick who can't come um, to the church, we take the Holy Communion to them. There are a lot of other things that we get involved with, and my favorite pastime this isn't so much on a Sunday, but it's associated with my parish, is the 6th of January, which is Three Kings. I participate once again in our community, dressed up as one of the kings, one of the wise men who came to Nazareth to see uh, to
The new,
see
the new king.
the new king. Yeah? And so that's something that's going to happen early January, and I'm looking forward to that as well.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Robert Sababady, for being with me today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me, Tony. It's been a real pleasure, and it's been a real honor to be able to spend this time with you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Conversation with Tony Mobley is produced by valued audio visual professionals who meet daily in Office Hours Global, hosted by Alex Lindsay. Thank you, Mimo Live and YouTube, Conversations with Real People. Stay tuned for new episodes and great conversations with Tony Mobley. Thank you, everyone, for the 100 plus episodes of Conversation with Tony Mobley. When you have time, we ask that you go back and look at those 100 plus conversations, and then maybe there might be something there that will be helpful to you. Again, we want to say thank you, Mr. Robert Sababady, for being here with me. We want to say thank you for being a part of our conversation today, for doing the work that you do, for being the person who you are. Conversation with Tony Mobley will resume with new episodes in January of 2024. We want to thank you so much. God bless you. Take care. Good night.